We're live. Oh, yes. Right. Okay. So, okay. So, I don't know if anyone's still watching, right? As anyone knows, I teach on Zoom about 8, 9, 10 times a week. And live streaming, basically it's extremely technical process to live stream, to broadcast. You're going to live stream using Zoom to get the clarity. You've got to set this up via a quite convoluted process. So to have the link put there a week before, 2 weeks before, right? So I'm going to check the links, right? Oh, brilliant! I'm live. Excellent. I'm actually live now. That's brilliant. Now, one of the things with me doing live on Monday was to be able to just set this up in advance, and my setup in advance link I've managed to finally get working. I haven't got stressed out, and we're running a little bit massively over time now. So I would like to thank the guys for joining us now and for being patient. And I'm going to say that on a Monday, I'm not sure I can do this every single week, but on a Monday I want to look at the archaeology, the history of Cymru. So fun with archaeology and history in Cymru, Wales. So if anyone's listening to this, they can probably hear my duck in the background. So I'm gonna have to take him up to have a bath in a minute. So this is my tester for a Monday. And what I'm probably going to do on a Monday is I'm going to grab books, various other bits and pieces, and we're going to look at them, right? So that's what I'm going to do. So I would like to know if anyone has got any areas or that look at the history of Wales that they would like me to look at. Now, I know somebody else is already doing this on a weekly basis, and I don't want to take away their positivity. But next week, I want to look at King Arthur and the link with King Arthur and this wonderful land of Cymru, Wales. Now, I know that there are groups of people out there who believe that King Arthur originated in Cornwall. There are other groups of people out there. Now, the people who look for the Cornish link to do with King Arthur are convinced, right? Team Tadjol, you got Weybridge, you've got everything you need in Cornwall, King Arthur, right? But then other people are going to be shouting at the screen saying, no, King Arthur comes actually from Glastonbury. And you look at Geoffrey Ash, for example. So then you've got people shouting and screaming at the screen saying, no, King Arthur. Now, small group of people, this is the smallest group of people, believe that King Arthur and the stories about King Arthur originate from Colchester. Camel and Junum, Camelot, ever heard of it? So, and then, without anyone switching off, big drum roll, King Arthur is believed to have come from other parts of Britain, including the north. Okay, let's not play and toy with you too much. Now, good friend of mine, Monica, she's very much into the King Arthur of Blackett Wilson and the King Arthur that comes from Cymru, Wales. And the problem is, when there are so many people out there who love to look at King Arthur and they like to argue and they like to fight over King Arthur, and there's actually lots of academic archaeologists who actually believe that King Arthur didn't exist at all. Now, I'm one of those academic archaeologists that can obviously see the need to have a King Arthur, And I'm one of those King Arthur. I'm one of those King Arthur lovers. I'm one of those King Arthur people that would say that let's look at the evidence for King Arthur, and that's exactly what I want to do next week. I want to look at the evidence for King Arthur next week. So those that have joined us now, do you know what I'd like to do, right? I would like to grab a book, right, off the shelf, a really oldie worldy book, right, off the shelf, and we're going to have a little look at it, okay, and see what that oldie worldy book says about the wonderful land of Cymru, the wonderful land of Wales. And whilst I'm just dashing away a second, right, I would like people to either like, share, save, join, buttons down below. And I would like them to say what they would like for me to do on Mondays at 8 o'clock, the 8 o'clock slot, via Zoom, via Facebook, via YouTube, or whatever we're doing, right? What areas of the wonderful land of Cymru, Wales, they would actually like me to look at, right? So that's really, really important. And I'm really hoping, I got to double check some. I haven't checked this yet, right? I'm really hoping, oh yeah, my sound's there. I got to check me for sound as well, to see how clear the sound is on here. So, yes, that sounds really good. Excellent. So, yeah, and also, when I did these sort of live Zoom, Facebook, YouTube thingy-majigs, right? This is what gives my voice. Yeah. Lots of people who do these. I'm going to do. Sorry. And we've got sound again. Woo! Yes. So it's learning these things. I'll go and get the book. Here we go. What are we doing, Ped? I've got a nice little book here. And it's called Tales of Wales. That's where we're going to go. We'll just have a little bit of Tales of Wales, I think. And it reminds me of anyone actually ever watched that series, Adrian Monk, a detective with OCD? And obviously I know nothing about OCD, not that I've got it myself. There was Dale the Whale, so he said Tales from Wales. So my partner Michelle actually collects these books. There's a very interesting story about this book. So what I'm going to do is everyone can wait for a little moment, right? Everyone can wait for a little moment. I shall be back. Amazing enough, I've got to just put the duck in the bath. Yes, we do have a duck, and he needs a bath. Yeah, duck having a bath. I know. I'll be back now. Ooh, 2 minutes. So, excellent. I'm glad you're still there, people. Right, so we've got tales about Wales. Now, there's a really interesting story about this book. And the reason why there's a really interesting story about this book is that Michelle, my other better, greater half, buys books like this off the internet. Right, now, there's a really interesting book. And the reason why is that my partner Michelle, we've won a competition to stay at a certain castle, which name shall remain anonymous, certain castle, which was part of the Get Me Out of Here, I'm a Celebrity, yes, series. And the family that owned that castle was the Wynne family, Wyne, of Aberconwy. Now, this book used to belong in that library, and because it's got the name of the person who used to own that certain castle in North Wales. So I think it's a wonderful little book because it's not only that it's 120 odd years old, plus actually, so 123 years old, and also when it was printed, because the inscription here has got 1848, and this book was printed in 1837. So there we go, we've got sort of a date for when this book was printed in 1837. And there's another interesting thing about this book is that it's, I know we sort of go over the border, but this book itself is obviously 1837, so that would directly link to the year, I should say, that the great Queen Victoria came to the throne. So this is, as I say, we got tales about Wales, and you know, we've got lots of books like this, and you know, it's rather interesting to look through the pages of books like this. You know, we see names occurring quite a lot, like Owain Glendower. Yeah, obviously the English spelt way, Owain Glyndŵr. So we've got a story in here, story of Owain Glyndŵr, Battle of Shrewsbury, Glyndŵr's alliance with Charles VI of France. Escape and recapture of two young noblemen, Owain's change of fortune, Owain Glyndŵr's death. Now that's a rather interesting one. And we've got in here Gelert's grave. We've got a whole chapter about Griffith ap Llywelyn's rebellion and imprisonment, his escape from the Tower, and death. Owain ap Griffith's release. He reigns jointly with his brother Llywelyn, conspires against him, is taken prisoner. Llywelyn defeats Prince Edward. Edward's revenge when King of England, his massacre of the Bards untrue. Rather lots of interesting things in here, and sometimes it's useful to sort of read these stories actually, because one of the things that lots of people who are supporters of Black and Wilson would say is that, back to King Arthur, and this is back to this book again, is that Black and Wilson has looked at the old books, and that's really useful, because when in a modern context, when people are writing about the history and archaeology of Wales, they're either making it up or they're a lot of supposition, right? And the one good thing in praise of Black and Wilson and their research with King Arthur, because we're looking at King Arthur next week, is they have looked at these old books. Now, the one thing about looking at old books is this is an old book. This is a 130 years old book, and where has the person who's writing this book, Tales About Wales, based all their information from? Now, the person who writes this book, well, it's edited by a Captain Basil Hall, Royal Navy, and it's sort of, and if we sort of go in, and we go in, really long letter there, and Tales About Wales, Chapter 1, Yew Trees, Bows and Arrows. Rather interesting. "Come and tell me a story, Mama," said little Lewis, one day after he had carefully picked up his 9 pins and balls and all his little picture books and put them by his play drawer. Rather interesting. "Not one out of the book, because I have been reading Cinderella and Goody Two-Shoes this morning. I should like to hear you tell a true story." That's really interesting, a true story. "For you say those little tales are only written to please babies." "And what are you then, Louis?" "Oh, I am not a baby now, Mama." There you go. "For I can read to myself, and without spelling every word over as I used to do. In this way, bad boy, bad boy, bad boy. I will run for a book, and you shall read. You will hear me read." So I'm trying to work out the context. Okay, so he's talking about himself there. "Stop," said Mama. So the little boy's just about to run for a book. "Stop, Mama. Stop," says Mama. "If you are in a very attentive mood, and I will not jump up from your seat to chase a butterfly that may come in at the window, or run to the door if you hear a dog bark, I will begin a story directly. But what shall it be about? Do you like fairy stories?" The little boy has already said he doesn't want fairy stories. He actually wants real stories. "Oh no, they are not true," the little boy says. "Tell me about battles and brave men who have fought their king and country, something like the stories from the history of England that you read to me about, Madcap Harry and the Black Prince." And the mum says, "Well, my boy, you remember being last summer in Wales." So this is basically, I think it's rather interesting that this story starts off and it's talking about the boy wanting a real story rather than Cinderella and Goody Two-Shoes. So it's a family over the border, and I say, "Do you want a true story about Wales?" So what's this true story about Wales going to be about? Now, I'm just going to check to see how many pages we've got here. It's quite long, actually, but we'll give it a go. "Well, my boy," the mum says, "you remember being last summer in Wales." "That is my native country," the mummy says. "And a fine country it is. I should definitely agree. With its woods of noble oak trees, its green valleys, winding rivers, bold rocks and high mountains. Wales has always been famous for brave men. May I say brave women? Not to forget Gwenllian, but maybe the mother didn't know about Gwenllian when she was telling a story to the boy. "Oh, then do tell me something about them," the little boy said. "I remember the nice garden where dear grandpapa gathered ripe strawberries for me, and the pretty flower beds on the green lawn, and the bows and arrows that my aunts used to shoot with." Aunts shooting bows and arrows, I think that's amazing. "But Papa told me that bows and arrows were used in war in old times, and not merely at archery meetings by ladies and gentlemen." Ooh. Now, what's this story about? So there you go. So they were, my dear, the mummy says, and they were much stronger and rougher looking than those your aunts shoot with. Indeed, the strongest men of these days could hardly string or draw such bows as our ancestors, the ancient Britons, used in war. They were generally made of twigs of yew or ash twisted together. The yew tree was preferred because its branches were more springy or elastic than any other. It is supposed to be for this reason that we see old yew trees in country churchyards, oh, she's talking about Wales, where they were planted as a place of security. So yew trees planted in churchyards, I like that one, because churchyard was sacred and they could not be injured or destroyed while growing there. Yew trees must be kept sacred in church graveyards. The Celts, I don't like using that word Celts, but anyway, who were the ancestors of the ancient Britons. Now, I don't agree with that. Shush. Made use of the wych elm for their bows. Now, let me interject. Now, I believe that the Britons have always been here, right, with lots of intermingling with different people from around the world. That's how it should be. And by saying that we were once Celts, I think it's a bit insulting, but anyway, let's carry on with the story. So the boy says, do you think, Mama, that the fine old yew trees in Guildford churchyard in Montgomeryshire were planted as long ago as the time of bows and arrows? Ooh, interesting. Boy's asking a very interesting question of his mum. And the mum says, I think it is possible to have been the case, as we know that bows and arrows, as well as stone cannon bullets, were in use as late as the year 1640. In the reign of Charles I. But the custom of placing yew trees in churchyards was kept up long after the reason of its commencement was forgotten. So obviously planting yew trees for, as we said, yew bows. Perhaps it was continued on account of the dark evergreen foliage of the yew, being thought appropriate to the solemn sadness of the home of the dead. Graveyard again. Beneath one of those trees at Guildford, there is a curious epitaph which discovers its age. This tree, however, appears much younger than its companions. So here we go. Interesting. Here lieth ye body of Richard Jones of Maesgwyn, gentleman who was interred December the 10th, 1707, aged 90. Now, this I do believe is at Guildford, which is in Montgomeryshire, Cymru. Under this yew tree, buried he would be for his father, and he planted this yew tree. So I was saying, not all yew trees in church graveyards are ancient. This is the case that a yew tree are being planted on top of somebody's grave. Rather interesting, that, isn't it? Now, if we suppose this Richard Jones to have been 14 years old when he assisted his father in planting the yew tree, it would thus have been done in the year 1631. Hang on a minute. So here lieth the body who was interred under this yew tree. How does that work out? Hang on a minute. Richard Jones. Richard Jones, who was interred December under this yew tree. Ah, right, yeah, because he planted it, didn't he? So, yeah, sorry. It would thus have been in the year 1631 before bows and arrows were disused. And if the yew tree was 10 years old when it was put in the ground, and they grow so slowly, there would have then have been but a very small tree. It must at this present time, 1837, be 216 years old, yet it is not at all decayed. So rather interesting that we were talking about a yew tree. Now 1837, so today you've got to add, well, it's not quite 200 years, is it? Anyway, whoever's joined us, we're looking at stories from Tales About Wales. We're looking at yew trees, actually. And this book is from 1837. So anyone who has joined us, just comment, like, subscribe, or even join button down below. Anyway, welcome everybody. There you go. And it's basically a story in this book between a mother and a child. Just a bit of a recap. The child's a bit sick of hearing fairy stories, and he wants to read real stories. So we're doing real stories of Wales. An arrow is a straight stick with a barb at one end and a feather at the other. The feather is so placed as to balance the arrow in its flight through the air, and the steel barb is shaped like a fish hook. With this difference that it has two of these backward points or barbs, so that if it enters the flesh, it cannot be pulled out without tearing it dreadfully. To render the wound more deadly, the point was sometimes dipped in poison beforehand, and this usage is still practiced amongst some of the wild Indian tribes. Now, interesting enough, this lady is writing, this lady's talking about bows and arrows. She's talking about, eventually bows and arrows will stop using in Wales, but we're talking in 1837. We've got another few decades that the Native Americans are fighting with the American army, and they're using bows and arrows. The other thing as well, as I would say, that people firing an arrow might dip the arrow in some mud or human waste down below them, and they fire it, and that causes extra disease. So anyway, she said, the mother says, I remember, oh, hang on a minute. No, the boy, this is the boy called Lewis. I remember, he said to his mum, the story of King Edward I being struck by a poisoned arrow in the Crusades or Holy War, and his wife, Queen Eleanor, saved his life by sucking the poison from the wound. So even the boy had lots of fairy stories. He had that little story, didn't he? That's interesting. And the mum said, she says, you are a good boy to remember so well what you read. I believe that was quite true. Arrows were not the only weapons used in the early ages. Swords, spears and lances. We don't hear the word lance, do we really? A lance on horseback. And battle axes were employed in war before gunpowder was invented, which discovery was made by a monk in the year 1330. Well, that's another story, isn't it? The ancient... Oh, could you just think of that? Maybe is this book suggesting, because she's telling the stories about Wales, is it suggesting that gunpowder was invented by a Welsh monk? We obviously know that the Chinese and the Japanese had gunpowder, didn't they? So anyway, she's... Again, those who have joined us, we've got 8 now. So, Tales About Wales. We're just looking at a nice little look at the archaeology and history of Cymru. And it's a mother talking to a son. So, get back to it. So, the mother says, the ancient Britons had also sharp cutting instruments fixed in the axle tree of their chariot wheels. That is, in the centre that the wheel turns upon. So, here we go. The ancient Britons, chariots. We know about chariots by what Julius Caesar wrote, really, haven't we? And these made dreadful butchery as they drove furiously through the ranks of their enemies. But all these instruments of carnage could be used only in close fight, whereas the arrows might be sent to a great distance and could even be made destructive when the enemy was completely guarded in front by palisades and ramparts. No, it says palisados. Palisados, not palisades. Palisados and ramparts. And the mum says, I will tell you how William, Duke of Normandy, who reigned afterwards in England by the title of William the Conqueror, contrived to reach Harold and his men when all means had failed of attacking them in their entrenchments. He ordered the archers to discharge their arrows upright, so that they might fall over the ramparts of the enemy's camp. Many were wounded in the face by this manoeuvre, and Harold himself was killed. So that's one interesting thing. We've gone back to England and the Battle of Hastings, and yes. So I wonder they do not use bows and arrows now. Do you not shoot with them at sea, Papa? Where's the dad come into this? No, my lad, we use cannon chiefly at sea. Yeah, I'm a bit confused where that is there. Maybe the dad's come in the room in the story. The boy Lewis says to his mum, please to tell me, dear mamma, what you mean by a rampart. I think it must be a high wall of earth or stones such as we see in old encampments, which were to keep the men within them safe from their enemies on the outside. I like the word encampments. We don't usually hear the word encampments in history and archaeology much, do we? And the word encampments is an old term, and I actually come across the word encampments in a Carry On film, Carry On Behind, and that was rather interesting, where Dr. Professor Donald, I was going to say Donald Trump, anyway. But moving on. Right, so Mummy says, you are right, my love. A rampart is a mound of earth raised round a place to resist the enemy's great shot. Large towns that are situated on the borders of an enemy's country or exposed to attack by sea are often strongly fortified by very thick walls, on which cannon and armed men may be stationed to fire upon an approaching enemy in all directions. These are artificial ramparts, a hill rising precipitously from a valley and forming a kind of inaccessible boundary, may be styled a natural rampart. But to return to the bows and arrows, the crossbow was used in England at least as early as the Norman conquest, which was effected in the year 1066. So we've gone back to the English side, haven't we? So I wanted to do more of the Welsh story, actually. Anyway, oh, and do you know what? Interesting enough, do you know what I'm going to do next week? This book has a story about King Arthur in it. Wouldn't that be great if we did the King Arthur story next week from this very book? I think I should do that. I think that'd be a good idea. It's quite a long story, actually, about King Arthur. Anyway, finish this story. What is the crossbow? Lewis asked his mum. It is a short but strong bow, generally made of steel, having a stock attached to the middle of it. This stock has a groove in it for the arrow and notches to receive and hold the string. When it is drawn into its place by means of a winch and rackwork, for the steel of which the crossbow is made is much too strong to be bent by the unassisted strength of a man's hand. When the arrow is to be shot, the string is slipped from its notch by a kind of button on the side of the stock. I wish you would let me have a bow and arrow to shoot with. So he's actually calling his mum Papa. I don't know. It's a bit strange, isn't it? Anyway, he talks. So I think it's gone a little bit off tangent here with these stories. The story I'll read the last bit of this anyway, because you've been very patient. Well, the mum says, well, if you will promise not to aim at anything but birds as they fly, I will make you a bow and arrow as soon as you please. Come with me to my carpenter's bench. When you are a little older, you shall have a hammer and a chisel of your own, and learn to drive a nail and use the glue pot. All useful knowledge is advantageous, and no gentleman should be too proud to acquire it, or lazy to practice it in case of necessity. I remember at sea being reduced to the expedient of washing and ironing my own shirt, and we had once a lady of quality on board, who, being the wife of a navy officer and having experienced many rough chances and changes of fortune, obliged her daughter to starch and iron their own muslin trimmings, and to learn the art of getting up plain linen. It's a strange thing, isn't it? This is a book about tales of Wales. Tales about Wales. There you go. And I will venture to say, the little boy said to Mama, that although these ladies are now the grace and ornament of high life, they will always reflect upon those duties with satisfaction and honour the parent who taught them that to be prepared against adversity by exercising the meaner arts of life is not incompatible with the acquirement of graceful accomplishment and elegant attainments. So yes, that's that. Now I'm going to dash soon, right? So I'd like to mention to everybody watching that next week we're going to be looking at King Arthur, and from 8 o'clock, a few technical problems. And again, everybody, don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't forget to join. So next week we're going to be looking at King Arthur. I mentioned a little bit from this book as an opening. I want to be discussing King Arthur next week. So I'm going to call it a day. If anyone wants to mention anything, so I'm going to type. And Lee, if you're there, thanks for joining us tonight as well. Thanks for becoming a member. I'm just going to type something in here in a minute, if I can remember how to do these things. Okay, I'm just going to type that in. Okay, so I'm just going to type. Anyway, many thanks for watching, everybody. And if anyone would like to join my online classes, I'll just put the link on there. You'll be very, 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 very welcome. And there we go. There we go. And what else should I do here? So yes, if anyone would like to join us, so it's going to be 8 p.m. Next Monday, and join me for King Arthur. That's what we're going to do next week. So I don't know if anyone wants to ask a question, but if they'd like to ask a question, please do so now. If not, I'm going to call this a day. So I'm just going to look at something a minute, and then I'm going to come back. And if anyone would like to join, then that's fine. So, do you know what I'm going to do now? The strange thing is whenever I do these live recordings, always towards the end I have more people joining. Oh, and it's been amazing, and I'll be here for next week. And Lee, is it Lee? I think so. Sorry. Anyway, thanks for rejoining, Lee. That's really, really appreciated. And yeah, it's been very difficult to get the technology sorted out tonight, and I managed to do it, and I'm so pleased that you're there. And if you ever want to visit the sites in Barry, and I think you were going to come out and help me make a film, that would be absolutely brilliant. So anyway, I'm going to say goodbye now. So I'm going to say good night, and let's type that in. Good night. Good night, everybody. And I'm crap with names, really bad. Anyway, thanks everybody. I'm off now. So you know what? I had a university lecturer. He kept saying, you've been saying that you're going to go for the past few minutes. Anyway, I'm gone. And loads of kisses, everybody. Thank you. Bye. Good night. See you next week. I'll watch out my videos throughout the week as well. Goodbye. Bye. I'm so pleased that worked. I really am. Anyway, I'm off. Stop live stream.